What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the first edition of Niners News with 49ers Hive. My name is Zach Hernandez. You can follow me on Twitter at Zach Hernan. I'm joined by my friend Matt. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Zach. You guys can follow me at Ataxis, ATAX1S, on Twitter.
All right, and let's get right into it. The biggest news of the weekend for the 49ers, they acquired Pro Bowl left tackle Trent Williams from the Washington Redskins in exchange for a 2025th and a 2021 third round pick. Matt, do you think that this proves the organization is committed to doing whatever it takes to win?
I think they proved that last year with that Super Bowl run. They arrived a year early. I think that it was opportune for them to get a left tackle, all things considered. But the way that they did it, essentially stealing Trent Williams from the Washington Redskins. There's a well documented history of the acrimonious relationship between Kyle Shanahan and Redskins owner Daniel Snyder. There's definitely no love lost there. Those men hate each other, and so the last thing that anybody in the world thought would be that Daniel Snyder would somehow help Kyle Shanahan in a crisis situation, as it turns out, for such a low price. I mean, this is theft of the highest order. Worst case scenario, because Trent Williams is on the last year of his deal. If the 49ers just somehow let him walk, which I doubt happens, but if somehow they let him walk, they will have rented a 7-time Pro Bowler for a season for essentially a 5th-round pick, because they'll get that third back as a compensatory pick in 2021. What do you think of the deal?
Yeah, I love it. Like you said, if they aren't able to restructure his contract or sign him to an extension, not restructure, they will restructure, but if they're not able to sign him long term, just like you said, they're renting a Pro Bowl left tackle, which is a keystone piece of any offense that wants to have any success in the NFL. And like you said, they're essentially just giving up a 5th-round pick. So that's it. It's you can't get that. I mean, teams can dream to pick one up in the first round of the NFL draft. So to be able to give up essentially a 5th-round pick to get Trent Williams, it's unheard of. And I've seen people complaining on Twitter saying that they gave up too much, or the price was too high, or they, perhaps that the 49ers shouldn't have been giving up draft picks because they had a lack of them to begin with. What do you think of that? Like, do you think that they should be more valuable, or should be valuing draft picks more?
No, I don't think so at all. And I think that for a lot of 49ers fans, the memory is short. Just last season, the Miami Dolphins traded Laramie Tunsil to the Houston Texans for a 1st-round pick. Now, I know Bill O'Brien is willy-nilly with everything that he does, but when you look at the compensation in terms of what Laramie Tunsil got as a trade value versus what a 7-time Pro Bowler in Trent Williams, and granted, he hasn't played in a year. He had that cancer scare last year with the Redskins, and they felt like he felt like the team wasn't doing right by him. But at the same time, the proof is in the pudding, and the man has had a year off to get fresh. And you're talking about a cornerstone left tackle that you got for a 5th-round pick this year and a 3rd next year. It's just there's no way that was too much compensation for him. I think the 49ers absolutely stole him away from the Washington Redskins.
Yeah, the thing that I think about most is that, like, when people say that they gave up too much, or I think that, he wasn't that valuable, it's like, okay, think about it this way. If you were to find a player like Trent Williams in the 5th round this year, wouldn't you be ecstatic to have found that? It's like, there's no way that you would be mad at giving up that price if you drafted him for a 5th-round pick. That's how I view it. People seem to value draft picks, at least people on Twitter seem to value draft picks as if they're gold. And it's like, no, I think this organization is doing right by the team by moving them, treating them like ammunition as they should be, rather than kind of hoarding them and trying to hold on to them whatever they can. Because, this team has, like, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's like 90% of their players returning.
Yeah.
And so there's not even that many roster spots to begin with. So the fact that they don't really need to keep adding players when there's not even the room to begin with. Now, there was reported, I think Ian Rappaport reported that Trent Williams could have gone to Minnesota. A deal was all worked out, and he would have gotten an extension in that case. He chose not to do that, and then he ended up deciding to come with the 49ers after all. Why do you think that was?
Well, 2 words: Kirk Cousins. Not to bag on Kirk, but it looks to me like Trent Williams looked at his situation and his time in Washington and saw the best part of it in Kyle Shanahan, what he perceived to be the best part of it, and then maybe the not so great part of it. Kirk Cousins is absolutely solid quarterback. But when you play with somebody for a number of years, you know what they're capable of, and when you're coached by somebody for a period of time, you know what that's like. So it's one of those things where he's seen what he likes, he's seen what he doesn't like, and he would rather not, because the report was he was also going to get an extension from Minnesota and is playing on his last year with the 49ers. So I think that speaks to how highly he holds Kyle Shanahan in regard and the potential that he sees, with San Francisco being coming off a Super Bowl run. He thinks that he can be that piece to get them back there.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I don't know. Okay, let me ask you this. Would you prefer that they do only rent him for a year, or do you think that they'd be better off in the long term re-signing him to kind of a monster deal, so to speak, if they're able to make the numbers work?
Well, to me, it's unfortunate that they couldn't trade for him before Laramie Tunsil got his extension because that's going to make it a little more expensive, I think. But if you have a left tackle, you keep that left tackle. It's not a situation of where it's like wide receiver that you can pick up in the draft, maybe like they've done with Deebo Samuel. It's not like a running back where those are a dime a dozen and those are pretty interchangeable. You're talking about a cornerstone left tackle, the guy that is going to keep Jimmy G's blind side protected and keep him upright. There's no price too high to pay to have that security. And, we'll talk about it coming up, but, going from all-time great Joe Staley to probably all-time great Trent Williams, I mean, essentially you've swapped out production for a player who is about 5-6 years younger. So you've just extended that stellar play at a critical position. And I don't think that can be overstated.
Yeah, when we were doing our draft first round kind of live stream, we were talking about how the 49ers, how they should approach it, how they should treat it. And I said, they should be simultaneously trying to keep their window as wide open currently, but also prolonging kind of the length that it is open. And I think this move does exactly that. You get a player who's in his prime right now. And like you said, 4 or 5 years younger than Joe Staley. So he's going to be in his prime for a few years to come if they're able to keep him, if they choose to keep him. I think that really, really helps him in the long term. And I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking the fact, too, that the former Redskins offensive line coach, Chris Forster, is now a part of the 49ers staff.
Right.
So do you think that that's going to make the transition as easily and seamlessly as possible when they do move to Trent Williams this season?
I think that Trent Williams is just a plug-and-play type player anyway, but the fact that he's familiar with the system is just going to accelerate that. So for me, he's going to make an immediate impact for the team, and he's going to stabilize what otherwise, all things considered, with, Joe Staley would have been something that would have been in flux and would have created a huge, huge deficiency for the 49ers offense.
Right. And then, also Trent Williams, you mentioned earlier, he did miss all of last year with a cancer scare.
Right.
Is that a concern or is that a plus?
To me, it's not a concern from the cancer standpoint. I mean, obviously cancer could come back at any time, but if they feel like they've done a good job, I don't know exactly what type it is, but there are several forms of treatable cancer. And if he feels like they've got it all and he's in a good place, that doesn't concern me. And from the physical side of it, I think it's a benefit that his body got rest. These offensive linemen, we've seen it now when they retire, Joe Thomas with the Cleveland Browns. We're talking about, Chris Hardwick with the Chargers, or Nick Hardwick. Chris Hardwick's the Walking Dead guy. Nick Hardwick. These guys slim up after they're done. The body is not meant to hold that much weight, and a lot of these guys shrink after they're done playing. So that takes a toll on joints. It takes a toll on soft tissue. It takes a toll on a lot of things. And for him, in what is essentially his athletic prime, to take a year off to get fresh after having a couple of kind of injury-prone seasons or injury-riddled seasons is going to be a huge, huge boon. It's not like he's going to forget how to play. Any rust that he may have is going to get knocked off in training camp and in the preseason. So by game one, he should be ready to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's a benefit for him rather than a negative. I saw people on Twitter kind of talking about, this guy hasn't even played football in a year, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, there's a big difference in Trent Williams taking a year off and Jerick McKinnon not playing in 2 years. Like that's a
Right.
totally different type of rust. I think this benefits Trent Williams. I think it benefits the 49ers. And if they choose to keep him long term, it's a huge benefit to the team. Over the weekend, the 49ers announced that Joe Staley would be retiring due to health concerns. That led them to trade for Trent Williams, as we discussed in our previous video. How do you think Joe Staley's legacy will look like, excuse me, in 5 to 10 years looking back?
He will be the most loved Joe in 49ers history, except for Joe Montana.
Okay, okay.
I think no, second only to Joe Montana. I mean, listen, Joe Staley is a 49ers legend. I mean, he has been the anchor for this team since he was drafted. He's a locker room leader. He's an affable guy. He was always quotable to the media, and that man played his tail off every single week and left everything that he had out on the football field. He's an easy Hall of Famer, and he should be up in the 49ers Ring of Fame at any given time. They should retire his number, everything. I mean, Joe Staley, 49ers legend, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. When the Mount Rushmore of the 49ers is all said and done, he will be up there. He's a fan favorite. He's a guy who, like you said, came in every day, worked his tail off, did whatever it took to become successful. And I don't know if you saw George Kittle's kind of goodbye message to him. Did you catch that?
I haven't watched it yet. So when he retired, he did the whole statement, right? And he
Mhm.
said that how selfish it would be if he decided to play for another year and that he wanted his daughters to know that he always chose them. That kind of like caught me in the feels. And 2020 has been hard enough already, with the loss of Kobe Bryant and all this stuff going on. And it was just like, I need to take a step back, let my emotions process before I catch any of these videos, because I'm not trying to be crying all weekend. You know what I mean? So I haven't caught it yet, but I heard that it was another tearjerker.
Yeah, no, I watched it and I couldn't even, get through it without the tears coming down. And I'm not really an emotional guy, but just knowing this is my team, it's my favorite team. I've followed them my whole life. And, seeing a guy like Joe Staley, our own Scott Gielan kind of said it best. He's kind of for me, for people my age, he's the first kind of generational talent that they were able to experience on the 49ers. I wasn't really able to watch Joe Montana, Steve Young. Kind of the closest to that was, Patrick Willis or guys like Terrell Owens. And, I think Joe
Right.
Staley is classes above them. So I think that it was a tough video to watch, but, classy by George Kittle nonetheless. Now, it was reported afterwards that Joe Staley had kind of alerted the team before the draft that he would be retiring due to health concerns. What does that say about Joe Staley that he still kept the team in mind? It didn't, wait till after the draft to tell them.
I mean, that's how he's been his entire career. He's always been a team first guy. And I would expect that to continue even in retirement. He's talked about being excited about still being around the team. I would be shocked if Joe Staley didn't have some sort of role with the coaching staff going forward. But Joe Staley has always been a classy player, in every sense of the word, a true professional. And so it's not shocking to me at all that he kept the 49ers in the loop. And I'm sure that, he wanted to give himself a little bit of distance after the Super Bowl, see what was going on, maybe get checked out by doctors to see what this really was. And I'm sure as soon as he found out, he was on the phone with John, he was on the phone with Kyle, trying to figure out where to go. He's not the type of guy to leave somebody hanging. He's the type of guy to pick up his fallen brothers, in battle and drag them with him. So, you know, always a leader, always a top-notch player, always team first. And it's no surprise that, he gave them the foresight and the ability to go out and get his replacement in Trent Williams.
Yeah, Matt Mayoko actually just tweeted, or excuse me, wrote an article recently of NBC Sports Bay Area about how his career is defined by selfless move after selfless move, and it's kind of finalized by the ultimate selfless move of putting the team first, letting them know when they could have drafted a guy like Tristan Wirfs or done it whatever they could to find his replacement and not kind of left them high and dry. If say he retires Monday, the draft just passed, the chance to move people just passed. So I thought that was just, like you said, speaks volumes of who Joe Staley is as a person
Mm-hmm.
and as a player. Now, I saw some people tweeting that, Joe Staley is a great 49er, but he's not necessarily in the highest class because he never got a ring. Do you think that affects how people will view him looking back?
I don't think so. Not at all. And that didn't get a ring thing is such a tired argument. Listen, there's plenty of people that don't get rings. That doesn't lessen their legacy. You're talking about the NFL, football, which is the ultimate team game. You're talking about 53 guys on a roster. This isn't, even something like the NBA where it's five people on the floor at the same time and one player, a dominant player can carry a team. Joe Staley's a left tackle, and he's been one of the best left tackles in the game. He was named to the NFL All Decade team. I don't know what else Joe could have done to make them win a Super Bowl. I mean, Joe Staley was not the reason that, the 49ers didn't win the Super Bowl in 2012 or this past season. That's just not the case. And, it's a good thing that Twitter isn't actually real life, because if it was, I mean, just burn the whole thing down. Anybody who is trying to already lessen the legacy of Joe Staley should be ashamed of themselves, because Joe Staley has been nothing but class for this organization, and he's going to go down as the best left tackle to ever play for the San Francisco 49ers, bar none. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and there's nothing that's going to cheapen his legacy. That man he's done more for this franchise than they possibly could have hoped for when they drafted him at 28th overall.
Yeah, 100%. He will be the best left tackle, like you said, 49ers history. And John Lynch kind of addressed this a couple of weeks back, or a week ago, I should say. He did say that, they've been in contact with Joe. I have a quote right here, actually. We've kept in good contact with Joe. He's doing his typical routine down with his family in San Diego, working out. We're encouraged. We've heard nothing that would lead us to believe that Joe is not going to play. So we're encouraged with that. We'll see where that goes. I've seen people kind of questioning John Lynch's transparency, I guess, so to speak, and how much they should value what he says as far as truthfulness. Do you think that alters how he should be perceived, whether he's telling the truth or not? Or do you think that that's just what a normal GM would say before the draft?
Well, two things. I don't think a normal GM would have said that. I think a normal GM would have avoided the question altogether. I think that, John essentially skirted around the truth. I'm sure Joe was doing things, physically or whatever to see what was going on as far as just his life going forward. It might not have been necessarily football related. But that being said, I mean, what is he supposed to do? It's draft time. And if you tip your hand, you lose your leverage. And this isn't about the players that are outgoing, even though Joe Staley is, a legend for the 49ers. This is about their prospects going forward. And they know that they need that replacement. And there's no way, had Joe Staley's retirement leaked out, that they would have gotten Trent Williams for a 5th in 2020 and a 3 in 2021. There's no way, because you would have given Daniel Snyder and the Redskins leverage that they did not have up until that point. If a team is desperate, then the person who has the commodity is going to make that person overpay, and by hiding that, I mean, even though it's a lie, technically, I mean, it is a lie, but, John Lynch doesn't owe the public every single inner working of the 49ers team. He's been transparent about everything since, before and since, and you can come out after and explain. And people who don't have understanding of how things work, I mean, there's nothing that you can say that's going to help that. But it's understandable why he wouldn't just come out and say it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like you said, before the NFL draft, why would any organization kind of tip their hat one way or another? Even with, acquiring Trent Williams, that would have totally upped the cost. I just think that he shouldn't be expected to be 100% truthful or answer every single question. People have to remember that they are running an organization. These things have ripple effects in the entire NFL. If he were to come out and say, yeah, Joe Staley's probably not going to play next year, guys. Now, can we get Trent Williams for a 3rd and a 5th? Like, no, that's not going to happen. So right. I think people just need to have a little more realistic expectations of what to expect out of him. And I don't think that should alter anybody's, view or opinion of how he is and his truthfulness when it comes to the media. Now, Matt, his retirement, he would have had an $11.5 million cap hit for next year. And if they were to release him, he would have had, 11 million and 11.5 million in dead money. But all of that changes now. Since he did retire, they're only responsible for $500,000 bonuses for each of the next 2 seasons. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of flexibility? Does that speak to what Parag and what the entire 49ers organization, is that normal for an NFL team to be able to play with the numbers this much? Or are the 49ers kind of one class above the other teams when it comes to all of the number work that they're able to make happen.
I think Parag is really good at doing team friendly deals, and I think that this is just another example of that. I don't know exactly how NFL retirement stuff works and if this is a unique situation or if this is the norm, but I do know that somebody like Joe Staley wouldn't leave the 49ers on the hook for that money. You know, him retiring and freeing the cap space up, which is essentially going to pay Trent Williams' salary this year, is something that he did for the team. And I'm sure that he'll be taken care of on the back end when he takes his position with the front office or, with the team coaching or whatever it is that he decides to do. You know, there's going to be compensation for that, and he's going to be a lifelong 49er. And I just think that this team does do a lot of things well with the salary cap. So it can't be understated, what that means going forward.
Yeah, I agree. You see teams kind of like, the Los Angeles Rams, they just get completely tied up in their salary cap. They're not able to work the numbers. And I'm not too versed in how other teams kind of handle it, but it seems like the 49ers, no matter what the situation is, they seem to be able to come out unscathed or on top of the situation cap wise, no matter what it is. And you just gotta, from a fan standpoint, from viewing it from the outside in, you got to appreciate it because it allows them to do things like acquire Trent Williams, not be on the line for $11.5 million in dead money if Joe Staley were to retire. The 49ers on Thursday, their first round pick, they were able to select Javon Kinlaw. They were able to trade back, from 13 to 14 to select Javon Kinlaw. How did you feel about the pick initially, and how do you feel about it now that time has kind of passed?
When I first saw the trade back, what I thought they were doing was going to be getting one of the wide receivers. You know, Ruggs was taken by the Las Vegas Raiders at 12, and then they were sitting there, and I figured that the team who was right after them, they traded with the
Tampa.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who wanted to come up and get their offensive tackle. That ended up being Tristan Wirfs, I believe. And so when they traded back, it was like, well, it's kind of obvious that the Bucs need offensive line. So Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb is going to be there for the 49ers. Lo and behold, they take Javon Kinlaw at a position of strength. I thought there was no way they were going to take a defensive lineman. Defensive line was still a position of strength, and they had so many needs: wide receiver, cornerback, which they did not address, puzzlingly enough. But when Javon Kinlaw came down, I was shocked and kind of off put by it. I was like, why would they do that? They don't have any first round skill talent. I don't understand at all. Looking back on it, it kind of does make sense from the fact that they were trying to replace DeForest Buckner. And if you look at their acquisitions, you look at Kinlaw, Aiyuk, who they traded back up to get later in round one, and then the acquisition of Trent Williams. It's kind of everything they lost, they replaced with something else. They got younger and or cheaper in those areas. And looking back on it, I kind of understand, and it makes me feel better about the pick just because, Kinlaw, the player, is a beast. He is a monster, athletic freak. He does have a little bit of technique issues, a little rough around the edges, but 49ers coaching is going to, do him wonders as far as working with Nick Bosa too, who is a technician like beyond compare for a rookie. The other thing that, is kind of a negative about Kinlaw is everybody talks about the knee tendonitis. That doesn't really concern me. He had a hip labrum tear that he had repaired, which could become an issue later on down his career. But for right now, considering that, Kinlaw plus Armstead is only a couple million more than what Buckner's making by himself in Indy. Solomon Thomas wasn't going anywhere. You have rotational pieces like DJ Jones coming off an ACL tear. Kinlaw is an absolute athletic freak and a monster who immediately can step in and plug and play and be a force for the 49ers.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as what he's making compared to DeForest Buckner. When I first saw this pick, we were on live. Everybody, our reactions kind of there to be seen.
Yep.
But I was stunned in the sense that I did not think they were going to do that. It brought me back to when they selected Solomon Thomas. And the whole time I was leading up to the draft, like, there's no way they're going to select Solomon Thomas. It's all smoke. They're going to take, so-and-so. And then they took Solomon Thomas, and I was just sitting there thinking, like, wow, that was pretty, telegraphed. But then on Thursday night when this happened,
I'll tell
go
you,
ahead.
hate to interrupt, but I'll tell you, as soon as I found out that Solomon Thomas went to Stanford with John Lynch, I knew that was the pick. I mean,
Yeah.
100% I knew. And I didn't like it because I knew Solomon Thomas had baby hands and he couldn't finish Pac 12 quarterbacks. So there was no way he was going to finish NFL athletes. And that kind of proved to be true. But as opposed to that, where some people kind of saw it coming, this came out of left field because most mocks had Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb, one of those wide receiver combinations, going to the 49ers. Kinlaw was kind of placed there early in January, February in the process, but then it switched to the wide receivers. So, I mean, it did come as a shock, absolute shock. I think you, me, and Perry were just kind of like slack jawed, like, what just happened?
Yeah, we were. And speaking of, Solomon Thomas going to Stanford, that connection, and even, when the 49ers took Debo, you know, coaches were raving about him at the Senior Bowl. So there was always some sort of ties to players. And we said it in the live stream. This was kind of the first year that they didn't really have any specific ties to certain players in the
Mm-hmm.
draft. And they really could have gone any way. And I think they were allowing their obsession, I said in quotes, with wide receivers to kind of flood the market of the media. That way other teams thought that's the area that they were going to go in. And when they had Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb on the board there at 14, we thought for sure it was going to be CeeDee Lamb. And when they took Javon Kinlaw, I was stunned, like I said, and I didn't really like the pick at first. I'm not going to lie. Javon Kinlaw is a great player in his own, but I just feel like he could have gone and been great for somebody else. The 49ers
Right.
had more glaring needs.
Yep.
But now that a couple days have passed and I've been able to kind of sit and analyze it, I like the pick. It's really growing on me. And I think more in the sense, like you said, it's trading one for another. They sent off DeForest Buckner and they got the 13th pick in exchange. They were moved back to 14. And then they got Javon Kinlaw, who should be able to step in day one and play at a relatively high level for a rookie. And I know a lot of people are saying, Kinlaw for Buckner, but I think it should be viewed as Buckner for Armstead and Kinlaw because there's no way you can keep both of them.
Right.
So I think that needs to be remembered as well, that you don't just get, it's not one for the other. It's probably two for one. And, you mentioned coaching. How
Mm-hmm.
important is it going to be going into this coaching staff where they have Coach Chris Kurserek and guys like, Eric Armstead, Nick Bosa, D Ford kind of feasting around them? Will that allow Javon Kinlaw to succeed at a relatively high level early on?
I think so. And, you talk about Coach K, he's like one of the best in the business. That line took a huge step up last year. And, D Ford and Nick Bosa's additions can't be understated, but, a lot of that was coaching. I mean, Armstead and Buckner had been here, and Armstead had his most productive season of his career last year. And the other thing that I think is overlooked is for as big as Kinlaw is, and he's 6'5, 315, 325, DeForest Buckner is a 300-pounder at 6'7", and Armstead is much the same. And you got a situation of with D Ford on the outside, Nick Bosa on the outside, you got two 6'7" dudes on the inside bumping into each other. They can't get through gaps because the other one has pushed their lineman into their space. Yada yada yada. You're talking about an athletic freak in Kinlaw who I mean, to me, for as good as Buckner was, his get off wasn't the best. You know, Kinlaw gets off. Like that kid is twitchy. And so he's going to be able to get through that gap. Even though he's not significantly smaller, every centimeter helps in the NFL. The adage is holes close as quickly as they open. And that's as true for the defensive line as it is for running backs, and to be able to shoot through that gap, in time and be able to beat his man to the gap and get to the quarterback or get to the running back can't be overstated. And a technician like Nick Bosa and a savvy veteran like D Ford and working next to Eric Armstead, along with Coach K's instruction, is just going to bring this kid along.
Yeah, he's definitely going to benefit from having guys like you just listed around him to help him succeed. He's not going to go in a situation where all of the pressure is on him. He's the only first round pick, and he's going to be expected to put up, godly numbers for a rookie. Now, Matt, how would you compare a guy like Kinlaw to aforementioned Solomon Thomas a couple years back?
Solomon Thomas is a tweener guy. He's not fast enough to or strong enough like to play the pure edge, but he's not big enough to be a defensive tackle. Kinlaw is stout. That man is going to be able to overpower people, bull rush people, get through the line. The only issue that Kinlaw might have is his pad level, and because he is so long, he kind of like comes up out of his stance a little bit at times. But those are things that can be coached. Pad level and stuff like that. Those can be coached out. But Solomon Thomas's, smaller hands, allowing people to, kind of get out of his reach. He's got a little bit shorter arms, so people can run past him, and just Solomon Thomas's lack of ideal size for a defensive tackle and athleticism for a pure edge rusher. That's not a problem. You can't fix those things, but it's not a problem for Kinlaw.
Yeah, I agree, and I definitely think the whole Solomon Thomas as a tweener. I didn't like the pick when they made it. I don't like
Neither
it
did I.
now. Yeah, I don't think that they could move on him if they wanted to. I don't think that there's
No.
enough teams interested, so they're kind of stuck with him. But I do think that the 49ers acquiring Kinlaw, whether you agree or not with the pick, he was, the number one interior defensive lineman in the NFL, or excuse me, in the
Mm-hmm.
NFL draft. So I think that it's a good pick no matter how you look at it. You
Mm-hmm.
could make the argument that there were more positions of need that kind of needed to be addressed. But I think that Kinlaw is a good pick for the 49ers. And like you said, being matched up with who he's going to be matched up with on that line is only going to, allow him to have success right away. Now, how do you think that he compares tit for tat with a guy that he's replacing, DeForest Buckner? Is there going to be a big drop off in talent and in production?
I don't think there's a big drop off in talent. Production might be a different story just because, a rookie defensive tackle coming into a system where you already have big time players, who knows what you're going to get as far as production wise. Um, I think he's a different type of player than DeForest Buckner. And let's not forget, DeForest Buckner's a Pro Bowler. That's going to be hard to replace no matter what. I just think that it's fortunate there's so much talent around Kinlaw that, as you said earlier, the pressure's not going to be on him, and he doesn't have to replace Buckner right away. This is this kicking the can down the road a couple years, and you hope in 2 or 3 years that he is DeForest Buckner or beyond. But as for his rookie season, I think to try and compare him to a Pro Bowler like DeForest Buckner, the second highest paid defensive tackle in the NFL, whether he is the second best or not, that does a disservice to Kinlaw. So for me, Kinlaw, take him as he is, and hopefully he can produce at a high level. But don't heap the expectations of being DeForest Buckner on the kid yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a high, big shoes to fill, so to speak. And I don't think it's fair for anybody to be compared to a guy like Buckner, especially when they haven't even taken a snap yet in the NFL. Let him kind of come in, let him just get acclimated, and let him run his own game, so to speak, and allow him to be his own player rather than to constantly be in the shadow of a guy like DeForest Buckner. Now, I read a story from SF Gate earlier talking about how Javon Kinlaw grew up homeless. He grew up kind of
Mm-hmm.
sleeping on friends' couches. They didn't have a lot of money growing up. To be able to come from a background like that and find at least the extreme high level of success that he has found thus far, does that speak to the work ethic already that he has without even, playing a single snap in the NFL, without going to an offseason camp? Can you kind of get a view of what type of guy he is just from being able to accomplish that?
Absolutely. I mean, this kid has a no die attitude. He could have let his circumstances get the better of him, but he fought through. He has dog in him, as some of our friends like to say. He's a guy that when life handed him something negative, he channeled that into something positive. And going forward, I mean, when you can take all the off-field stuff and set it aside so that you can be the best player that you can be on the field, that's not going to change. That's ingrained in who he is. You either have that or you don't. And sometimes circumstances can mold you. It's like a crucible where you just burn away all of the laziness and all of the crap just to be able to get there with something pure work ethic, something that's valuable. And he's going to go with that going forward. So I expect him to continue to be a fighter, and that fits the culture of this team perfectly.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the saying is, good things are kind of born out of necessity, and that's exactly what his story is kind of all about. He had no choice but to fight and to get, where he needed to get. He didn't have a choice. Failure wasn't an option. So he needed to do whatever he could to make sure he got to the NFL, to the 49ers, and find success. So it's just one heck of a story. And I really, really wish the best for Javon Kinlaw. And I hope he does it with the 49ers, obviously. Brandon Aiyuk. Do you think that he struggles with physicality when it comes to running routes and such? Do you think that that will really, really affect his game once he gets to the NFL where it's bigger, stronger, faster?
I think that he has a problem that a lot of college receivers have in that press man is kind of dying in the college game. A lot of these top guys haven't faced it. That was the thing with CD Lamb in the Big 12 where they play absolutely zero defense. Even Jerry Jeudy at times, there are questions about, hey, can he get off a press? Can he, not get knocked off his route tree easily? What's going on? And I think the same thing is true with Brandon Aiyuk. And the thing about him is beyond that, I mean, as far as playing to contact, that's not a concern. That physicality isn't a concern. Getting off of the line in press coverage, that's remained to be seen, but that's something that can be coached. As far as speed and being able to, break through tackles and fight for yards. I mean, the kid has juice, so I'm not worried about that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like you said, it's all kind of minor things that can be coached. I don't think that there's any giant red flag when it comes to his physicality or lack of, I should say. I think you said it earlier. He kind of reminds you of a Debo Samuel type of guy, especially, when it comes to having the ball in his hands and kind of making plays. Do you think that he's going to be able to really open up this offense? I was watching some of his tape earlier,
Mhm.
and man, that guy gets over the top and it's game over. Will the 49ers be able to see some of that this year?
I think so. He does profile to me a little bit like Debo, and then a little bit like a lot of people are saying Pierre Garcon, which I also see. I think he's a little bit faster than Pierre Garcon, though. The thing about
Yeah.
him is his wingspan is ridiculous for somebody his height. You're talking about the 5'11" and 5'8" guy at the combine with the wingspan of a dude who's 6'8", which is just kind of ridiculous. So he's going to be able to reach out, pluck balls. Sometimes Jimmy has gotten a little loose with those balls, and they've gotten, pardon the phrasing, but Jimmy has gotten a little bit loose with his throws, and some have sailed. And being able to pluck that out of the sky with those long arms is going to be to a benefit. As for opening the offense up, um, you want to see it, but at the same time, there's a part of me, because going back to the draft, Kyle had said, Brandon Aiyuk, we had him right there with CD Lamb, as one of those guys that was just, one of those players. And I think that's a little bit of an overstatement. If you ask me, I think that was a little bit of smoke. That was Kyle justifying trading back up 6 spots and using the fourth round pick that they got, sliding back in the draft, fourth or fifth, whichever it was, um, to go get Brandon Aiyuk, who was on most people, including my board, was in that second tier wide receiver class. He's a good player, and he, went around the spot that I thought he would go, especially when you consider that the Vikings took Justin Jefferson just a couple picks before. But to say that he was, on par with CeeDee Lamb, I think that's a little bit of Kyle being a gamesman and wanting to welcome the new guy. Um, but that doesn't mean that Aiyuk can't come in and be a contributor right away. So depending on coaching, depending on, how everything shakes out with off-season workouts, considering the, the state of the country and the pandemic that we're in, being able to get him in and learn the playbook, which is complicated, and getting him out there to improve upon the things that he doesn't do well. That's critical in him being able to slot across from Debo Samuel, who is in all likelihood going to be the number one receiver for the 49ers.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I spoke with Al Sacco of Fourth and Nine and 49ers Web Zone. Make sure you guys check out that video if you haven't already. And I kind of asked him if he felt that the 49ers were blowing smoke when they said that he was their number one receiver. And he kind of thought the same thing. He was saying that that might not have been the case, but they're not going to say, no,
Right.
actually, he was our number third or fourth wide receiver. So I think that there are certain traits that Kyle Shanahan covets. And
Definitely.
I think Brandon Aiyuk does have a lot of those traits. So maybe in a sense, he was the best fitting wide receiver, but that's not necessarily the most talented wide receiver. So I can
Right.
understand what they meant, but
Yeah,
not necessarily speaking
and I think
100%
that
facts. Go ahead.
yeah, and I think that comes with, you know, the minute that they passed on wide receiver for Javon Kinlaw, they had to know that those top tier receivers were not going to make it to him. That Judy was probably going to Denver, which everybody called as soon as the 49ers passed on him. Everybody knew he was going to Denver. And then CeeDee Lamb ended up going to Dallas at 17, but he wasn't going to, if he was somehow miraculously there at, 22, I think the Vikings picked, he wasn't getting past Minnesota. So they had to know that they were going to pick a second tier wide receiver at the back end of the first round. And I think that, when Kyle says, oh, he was right up there on our board, maybe he was the top of their second tier wide receiver list. But I don't think that he was up there with, the supposed wide receiver ones of the class.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that 100%. Now, do you think that not getting a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy, who were both there at 14 when the 49ers picked, and instead getting a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, do you think that's going to hurt kind of Jimmy Garoppolo in the sense of the continued narrative that he's not, a great quarterback? And if the 49ers did get a guy like Lamb or Jeudy, it would help him out getting that number one absolute target. Do you think Aiyuk is not going to be able to do that and in fact hurt Jimmy Garoppolo's continued growth?
I don't think so. I think the people that like Jimmy. The ones that don't. And, the Stephen A. Smiths of the world are always going to be out there to, call him names and say he can't play and this and this and that. His teammates know. And I actually think in this case, by getting a guy who so many people thought was that second tier of wide receiver, if Jimmy can elevate his play this year and progress like we expect him to, being his second full year as a starter and actually getting in the game and playing, if he can do that with a guy that everybody thought wasn't at the top and was less than Jeudy and Lamb, I think that speaks more to Jimmy having improved rather than being a detriment to him.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. On the flip side, just like you did, if he's able to find success with Aiyuk, with Debo, he could kind of say, look, I've done this all without a number one true target, a number one guy on the outside who's going to go up, get all of 50-50 balls, take them all to the house. And that would just speak to his case more. I do believe in Jimmy Garoppolo. I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people aren't sold. It's kind of like a tired meme at this point. Well, your quarterback's Jimmy Garoppolo. It's like, look, Jimmy Garoppolo last year was essentially his first full year as a starter, coming off of a torn ACL. And I thought he played pretty well, all things considered. I'm reading some of the Draft Network's scouting report
Mm-hmm.
negatives right now, and they list route definition and sharpness, his pad level and routes, and kind of a lack of variety when it comes to running a route tree.
Mm-hmm.
Are these all things that can be coached up, or are they red flags that need to be major concerns to be addressed?
I don't think that they're necessarily red flags. We talked earlier about him being a junior college kid and not having those years at Arizona State to learn those routes. That's something that comes with experience and that comes with stuff, that you can coach. And I think that, Debo Samuel, that was the same knock against him. He doesn't run crispy routes. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. All he does is slants. All he does is slants. Yeah, he does slants, but there's reasons why it works. He's good at those things, and not everybody has to be, twinkle toes on the field. They don't have to be the phenomenal route runner that a guy like Jerry Jeudy is to necessarily be effective. You can coach those traits up, but there's as long as he can catch the ball, that's what matters. The proof is in the tape where he gets separation, he makes those catches, and then he's off to the races. He is a yak monster. So, you can run the best routes in the world, but if you're not catching the ball, who cares? It's just one of those things where work with the kid, improve Aiyuk wherever you can as far as route running goes, and then let his athleticism and his ability to create separation do the rest of the work.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that the 49ers, you saw what they were able to do with a guy like Debo Samuel, who may have come out, a tad bit raw. They were able to take his strengths, really, really work them up. And he was, probably the number one rookie wide receiver last year. You can maybe make the case for DK or AJ Brown, but Debo was really, really good. And he came on when it mattered most towards the end of the season. Do you think that the 49ers should be able to play up Aiyuk's strengths, or do you think that it's kind of going to be a challenge with him getting acclimated to the system? I know Kyle Shanahan's system's kind of known for being difficult to get. Do you think there's going to be a learning curve there?
There's going to be a learning curve, but as we've seen in each of the last 2 years in Kyle's offense. First with Dante Pettis, who for some reason fell off a cliff this year, and secondly Deebo Samuel. That rookies do get opportunities in this offense, and it's about what you do with those opportunities. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be times where you make mistakes. Maybe you drop a pass here or you run a wrong route there, but Kyle is very much a learn on the fly type of guy, and as long as you don't make the same mistake twice, you're going to stay out of his doghouse and be able to prove yourself over the long haul. So I fully expect Aiyuk to get his opportunities early. Maybe he won't start right away, like Deebo didn't really start right away, but over the course of the season, I would expect more packages, more plays, more snaps for Aiyuk as we go along.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And that's a good point with, looking back to Dante and Debo, how they were both able to kind of find success early on. Say what you will about Dante Pettis last season, but, their rookie seasons, they showed a lot of promise. And I'm extremely excited to see what a guy like Brandon Aiyuk brings to the table, first thing, because this offense is kind of miles ahead of where the offenses were with Dante Pettis started. Even last year when Debo started, they still needed to kind of find a groove. This year, they have an identity as a team, and I'm extremely excited to see what he can do. Real quick, what would you put an over-under as far as yards after the catch for Debo and Brandon Aiyuk combined?
Combined, oh my goodness. Yards after the catch, man. Between the two of them, there's no reason why they can't have 1,000 yards after the catch.
That's exactly what I was thinking. With the draft concluding, the 2020 NFL draft, how would you view this roster going into next season as opposed to where it was at the end of last season? Do you think they're better, the same, or worse off?
The easy thing to do is what some people on Twitter are doing and looking at, okay, well they got rid of Buckner, but they got Kinlaw. They let Emmanuel Sanders walk, but they got Brandon Aiyuk. Joe Staley retired, but they got Trent Williams. And they look at it in a vacuum, just those three players, what went out, what went in. I would say that the roster is actually going to be better. And the reason I say that is even if you have some loss of production with Kinlaw and Aiyuk compared to Sanders and Buckner, which may be the case, Trent Williams at 31 is probably going to be a little bit better than Joe Staley at 35. And the thing that really makes a difference is Jimmy Garoppolo just finished his first full season as a starter, so you can expect some improvement there. Beyond that, the 49ers last year, once again, were one of the hardest hit teams by injuries. DJ Jones was out. Jalen Hurd never saw the field. Trent Taylor never saw the field. We're going to get those guys back. And when you look at that, I mean, you're adding Brandon Aiyuk and you lost Emmanuel Sanders, but now you're also potentially gaining two other receivers that are going to fill the void, And I think that when you look at all of that combined, if the 49ers just get that law of averages back and have a healthy season, this is going to be a much better roster than last year. And I fully expect them to make another run at it. Other teams have gotten better too. So, you're only as good as the latest thing you do. But on paper, this should be a better team at the start of 2020 than they were after the Super Bowl.
Now, just going over the additions from last year, you got Javon Kinlaw, Brandon Aiyuk, Colton Mikovits, Charlie Warner, and Juwan Jennings. Now, also add in Trent Williams. I'm not quite sure what the argument is for this team is worse off than they were at the end of last year. Could you make that argument?
I think you can make that argument from the standpoint, if you were to make that argument, you make that standpoint of, the offensive tackle they took in the fifth round, Mikovits, what his name is, that he's not the type of player that's going to step in and play right away. You could say that, Werner is a blocking only, like a little bit light for a tight end, might be more suited for the H-back position. You say that, Juwan Jennings, oh my God, that guy ran at 4.7, 240 at the combine. That guy sucks. You know what I mean? You could make that argument. You can make the argument that maybe Williams doesn't come back as good as he was. But that's a really pessimistic view. This regime has shown that, especially in the late rounds, that they draft pretty well. And even if these guys are depth pieces, you got to look at it from the fact that this is a Super Bowl roster. Of course, a lot of your draft pieces are going to be depth pieces. The people that draft people to play right away are the bad teams. Those are the guys that, oh man, we need every pick to hit just so we have a chance. The Jacksonvilles of the world, those are the people that are waiting for that. What we're doing is we're supplementing and reshaping and reloading, not even reloading, but just making adjustments to the roster that we have so that going forward we can make another run at it, And you look again, that's discounting the guys that are also coming back from injury too, and discounting growth of Jimmy Garoppolo, discounting growth of Deebo Samuel, discounting growth of Akella Witherspoon, discounting growth of all these guys, Emmanuel Mosley. That's discounting all this growth, a full season of a healthy Quan Alexander and a D Ford. You look at that, year 2 of Nick Bosa. So to say that things are static and that this team is demonstrably worse is just, you could try to make the argument, but I don't think it's a good one, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And then they also were able to move, Matt Breida and Marquise Goodwin. Matt Breida was a productive running back in this offense. However, he did have his issues. He wasn't able to carry on to the ball. He was able to, he was a really, really fast running back, and that showed, in the first play of that Cleveland game where he took it to the house. But other than that, he kind of remained in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse for the majority of the season. And Marquise Goodwin was never really able to get it going this year. So I don't really see the argument. Go ahead.
Yeah. The best ability I always say is availability. And you're talking about, Marquise Goodwin tragedy and personal problems and things like that. And you feel bad for a guy, but, on the football field, that doesn't really, say much for reliability as far as you hate to see those things happen. But at some point, the team's got to be like, well, I mean, we've tried to work with you. We need to get better. You're kind of buried on the depth chart anyway. What can we get? He had a $4.5 million, cap number this year. They were able to get that off of the books. Matt Breida had signed a second-round tender, but he was a guy that was always banged up, couldn't stay healthy, had problems holding onto the ball, and he was buried. Raheem Mostert had risen up the ranks. Jet McKinnon's coming back, and you don't know what you have in him, but he restructured his contract to the vet minimum, so he's going to at least stick around through training camp. And then you have Tevin Coleman, who is a Kyle Shanahan favorite and was kind of a lock for the roster after April 1st when $2 million of his $4.5 million salary became guaranteed. So it kind of left Breida as the odd man out. And you get rid of those guys while they have value so that you can get something else for them. And those picks did, in fact, turn into Mikvitz and Werner. So, you see what you got in those guys. So for me, it's just, it's addition by subtraction in a certain sense,
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point. They were able to get immediate yield on their return with Mikovits and Warner. And, these are guys, like you said earlier, they're depth pieces, but depth is always a key indicator of whether a team is successful or not. You also mentioned being, bitten by the injury bug. This team, the last couple of years, whatever it may be, they can't seem to escape injuries. And having key depth pieces is the solution to injuries. Obviously, you're hoping these guys never see the field in an extended period of time, but the goal is that if they do ever need to see the field, that they're able to step in and there's not that giant drop-off in talent, not that giant drop-off in production. And I think that's what the 49ers are kind of aiming to do here. Now, you mentioned the 49ers running back room. You mentioned McKinnon, Mostert, Coleman. Is that group? They did not add a running back in the draft. I believe they signed a undrafted free agent.
They signed
However,
two.
They signed two? Okay.
Two, yeah.
Do you think that group is going to be better off next year?
I don't know better off necessarily, but I don't think they're going to be any worse.
Right.
Whatever McKinnon can give you is whatever McKinnon can give you. The hope is that he returns somewhat to form where he would be the only true 3-down running back that the 49ers have. He's a legitimate pass catching running back. So something that Breida struggled with, something that Coleman has struggled with at times. They haven't asked Mostert to do it as much, but I mean, you saw in that zero blitz who they have in there on a passing situation, Jeff Wilson Jr. You still have him in the mix. So it remains to be seen. To me, the area that needs to be addressed the most is the defensive backs, and they didn't touch that at all. And for me, that is a red flag, and that is something that I don't understand because you have almost the entire secondary coming off a contract after this year. Richard Sherman's not getting any younger. Akella Witherspoon, while he showed promise in the first part of the season, after he came back from injury, he showed some of those bad tendencies that he had in 2018, where he was committing a lot of penalties, having mental lapses, and they really need to clean that up. Emmanuel Mosley, for as good as he's been, is he going to fall off once teams get tape on him and are able to study him? These are questions that we have, but that we didn't get answered because they didn't address the position in any way, shape, or form. That tells me they might have confidence in it, but I don't know that with George Kittle's contract coming up, you have to re-sign Trent Williams if you're going to re-sign him. What money does that leave for Emmanuel Mosley and Akella Witherspoon and people? You're going to have to count on them taking a hometown discount or use a lot of draft capital in the 2021 draft to address that need at cornerback. And who's to say if this upcoming crop of cornerbacks outside of maybe like a Patrick Surtain are going to be those elite level cornerbacks.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this with Al Sacco, 4th and 9, and 49ers Web Zone. Check out that video if you guys haven't already. Are they depending a little too much on their stout, elite defensive line to where they're kind of neglecting the secondary? Do you think that's the case?
I do, and you think if you had to choose between the two, they're obviously going with the right choice. I think having a great pass rush can cover up a lot of warts in the secondary. As Kansas City obviously showed, if you can get to the quarterback, sometimes even if you're giving up some plays and you have a good offense like they do, like the 49ers did, who are, also a top scoring team in the NFL, you can overcome some of that. But the big thing is like, you're seeing Richard Sherman age right before your eyes. It started with Green Bay picking on him in the NFC Championship game, and it continued with Sammy Watkins, absolutely making him burnt toast in the Super Bowl. And you're looking at a guy who, at this point, might be more valuable as a locker room leader than he is as a lead dog at the cornerback position, because his athleticism is quickly waning, and you don't have the guys to step up or replace him necessarily. And even if these guys are the guys, you can't have all of them coming up for contract at the same time. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So if I were to criticize any area of the roster building, that would be the aspect that I criticize.
Yeah, the decision to not address it at all was perplexing to me. I was kind of expecting them to take a defensive back at some point in this draft, and they didn't do that. Do you think that their guy just necessarily wasn't there? Would you have preferred they would have taken a cornerback instead of Javon Kinlaw, or do you think that there were none there that were even close to being not a reach?
I think the writing was on the wall. I believe C.J. Henderson went before they even picked. So once that happened, I felt like that cornerback was off the board, at least for a while, because after those two guys, there really was a significant drop-off in quality. After Okudah and Henderson, the class just wasn't really as good. And you saw that with where the rest of them went. I think the next one off the board was I don't even know who the next one off the board was. They were talking about Christian Fulton. He fell to like the 3rd or 4th round. Tavon Diggs was 2nd round to the Cowboys, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
None of the safeties got taken in round 1. I mean, and that was Xavier McKinney, Grant Delpit. You're talking about those guys. None of them went. So to me, it seemed like it was outside of Okudah and Henderson might have been a weak class as far as defensive backs go. But at the same time, when you're getting into 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounds, there were still guys on the board that you might have been able to take or at least take a chance on. I know tight end became a need after Garrett Selleck retired and Levine Toilolo went to the Falcons. But to draft, and this is, nothing against Mikovits or Mikavitz. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, and I'm sorry for
I think it's Mikovits.
Okay, if it's Mikovits, okay. When you draft a guy like Mikovits, where does he slot in? Because you have, outside of McGlinchey and Williams, who should be the tent poles as your tackles, you have Brunskill, who can go pretty much anywhere in the line, right? You have Sean Coleman coming back from injury. You still have Justin School, who they took last year. So it kind of becomes a crowded room, and you wonder where this guy is going to go. He doesn't fit the profile of what Shanahan likes, which is guys that can get out in space and move. That's actually kind of his weakness. And it's kind of a missed opportunity to at least not take a flyer out on a guy that could be productive in a cover 3 system, So to me, that's where I think I would have changed things. Maybe not necessarily at 13 because Henderson was gone by then, but in the 5th round, take a chance on a guy that could develop into something. And, maybe they just didn't have that guy on their board.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of them weren't there, where they picked, and, at least to not be a giant reach. And like you said, I kind of would have liked him to have at least taken a flyer on a guy later on. some did fall pretty late, and that they would have been there for them to take, and they obviously went in a different direction. Um, Now, comparing the 49ers, better, same, worse, how would you view them in aspect of the rest of the division? Do you think that other teams surpass them, so to speak, with their draft, or do you think that they remained above the rest of the teams in the division?
No, they're still the cream of the crop in the division. And I mean, looking at how some people like the Seahawks draft, but their first round selections baffle me. I don't understand what they seem to not like first round picks. I mean, if they were smart, they just trade them away because every time they pick there, they screw it up. Nobody liked Jordan Brooks to them. Like everybody thought that was a reach. Um, Arizona had a good draft, and they did a great job improving by, I mean, absolutely fleecing Bill O'Brien for DeAndre Hopkins. Isaiah Simmons, I can tell you right now that the purpose of drafting Isaiah Simmons is to take away George Kittle. I mean, that's exactly what that is. He chewed them up last year. He chews up everybody. I mean, he's George Kittle. He's the best tight end in football. But they got better. The Rams are absolutely terrible, and they're going to be at the bottom of the division. There's no question there that they're just going to be bad. And you could see it pasted all over Sean McVay's face the entire draft. He came out afterwards when asked about Trent Williams, said he needed to go drink more beer. That's how frustrated he is. And you can see that there's fracturing of the relationship between him and Les Snead. So I think the Rams take a significant step back. The Cardinals are going to take a significant step forward, and the Seahawks, I think, are going to fall off a little bit because there's only so long that a 31-year-old Russell Wilson can carry that team without them significantly addressing the offensive line and addressing that poor secondary, and they didn't do those things in the draft. So to me, the 49ers are still the cream of the crop, but Arizona is a team to watch out for. They played us tough last year, and I expect them to do it again this year.
Yeah, I actually agree. Yeah, I think Arizona is going to be much improved on this year, and they were good this year. A lot of people kind of write them off as a crappier team, so to speak. Excuse my language, but they were good.
Yeah.
They played us, really tough, like you said, and I agree with your kind of assessment there. The Rams are still going to continue to be the bottom laughing stock of the NFC West. Arizona's going to take a leap forward, and Seattle's kind of going to drop a bit.
I mean, I'm
Um,
gonna just say this right now. The Rams didn't have a first round pick. Their first pick in the second round was a running back, and not even one of the highly touted ones. I honestly had never heard of Cam Akers when they drafted him. I was like, "Who is that?"
yeah,
And
it
it was
questionable.
baffling to me. They had so many other areas of need. You know, they took a running back in the third round last year, that Henderson kid.
Yeah,
And so they take another one this year, and it's just I don't get what they're doing, and
yeah,
I don't think Sean McVay gets what they're doing because he looks just as puzzled as the rest of us.
yeah. He looked
So
pretty heated.
he definitely did. I think there's something going on there with Les Snead. Maybe the wheels are falling off of Les Snead a little bit, and he feels the pressure because I mean he was the one that generated those terrible contracts. He was the one that signed Goff. It's crazy to me. I don't understand what he was thinking.
Yeah, I saw I think it was Cam Hayward, I could be wrong, but he tweeted at some of these general managers and coaches need to be drug tested for their questionable choices in the draft.
Absolutely,
That was
absolutely.
hilarious. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true though. Um Now the 49ers, do you think that it was puzzling, as at least as it was to me, that the rest of the NFC West didn't really address shoring up their offensive line when the 49ers are feasting on everybody with their defensive line? What's the logic in that?
I think they got to a point where, Arizona, if you were going to take an offensive tackle at the first spot, you just weren't going to take one. At some point, you got to look at what was on the board and ask yourself, is it going to make enough of a difference? Do we get a playmaker for what the 49ers perceived weakness is, which is Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you get a guy that's going to be able to counter them there? Because I don't think that there's anything that you can do really other than maybe slow this defensive line down for a little bit. I mean, you saw it in the Super Bowl, even Kansas City, the prolific offense. Everybody struggles, They had to hold the entire game. There comes a point where there's not a lot you can do. And so if you don't think it's going to be effective, then maybe you apply your picks elsewhere to try and catch up in other regards, force Jimmy Garoppolo to make mistakes if you don't think that he can do that sort of thing. So that's where I think the NFC West comes in as far as not drafting offensive linemen. The Seahawks were never going to do it. I don't think the Rams were either. But as far as Arizona, you get a savage playmaker on defense in Simmons, who can patrol the middle and hopefully take away Jimmy's security blankets, because that's where he's best, is between those numbers. So if you got a guy that can go hash to hash and is athletic, then maybe you can make a dent.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, do you think you spoke about the Rams a little bit earlier and how they were completely screwed over by their caps contract and their lack of cap space? Compare this team coming off of a Super Bowl loss to where the Rams were when they came off of a Super Bowl loss. Should the 49ers fans expect a giant drop-off?
No, they're going to compete. They might not go 13-3. They might be 11-5, 12-4, and that's just the ever-changing nature of the NFL. It's without looking at their schedule, they're going to have some teams that take a step back, like the New England Patriots, who are on their schedule this year, but you're going to have other teams that take a step forward. I believe they play the Miami Dolphins, who had a hell of a draft, who are going to be a hard out for anybody because Brian Flores has them playing hard. The Arizona Cardinals, like I said, they played us tough last year. I think they're going to play us even tougher this year, and we might not be able to make those comebacks this year. We might go 1-1 with them. You never know. You never know how the ball is going to bounce, so to speak, and to just say, oh, well, they're going to be 13-3 again and cakewalk to the Super Bowl. You can't take that for granted. And the last thing that you want is for that hunger to die in those players. You want them to be miffed about, being 6.5 minutes away from a championship. You want them to carry that chip on their shoulder throughout the season. So as Kyle always says, it's 1 week at a time, one game at a time, one play at a time. That's the only way that you could look at it. And beyond that, to make a prediction of whether or not, they're going to be better or worse record wise, I mean, that's, to me, it's premature to do that.
Yeah. And a lot of teams are growing. I think the 49ers just need to continue doing what they do. And my last question I have for you is, last year, obviously, we saw them become an extremely stout run first team. Do you think that's going to be their identity moving forward, or do you think they kind of progress into more of an aerial attack type team?
That's going to depend on the growth of Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think that part of the playoff run was they didn't need to throw, and I think part of it in the playoff run was Kyle Shanahan wasn't going to make Jimmy throw any more than he had to. So the biggest issue with Jimmy Garoppolo was he got loose with the football at times. He thought his arm could get a ball in a spot past the defender that, it just wasn't capable of getting to. And that confidence is good. You'd rather have your quarterback be a little overconfident rather than someone like Alex Smith, who never takes chances. But then again, there's no explosive plays. And I love Alex Smith, but I mean, it's dink and dunk city. I don't think Jimmy's a dink and dunk guy. He really needs to work on his deep ball. I hope that he does that in the offseason. And the other thing is, which will come with experience, is, he sometimes doesn't see linebackers in zone. And if he can clean those things up, then Kyle will feel more comfortable throwing the ball. I also think Brandon Aiyuk, if he can, develop into a complement to Debo, and Jalen Hurd comes back and Trent Taylor comes back, who Jimmy has great rapport with. If those guys come back and all of a sudden they're slicing and dicing and, running crisp routes all over the field and just juking everybody out of their shoes, there's no reason not to throw the ball 35, 40 times. The reason why they ran the ball so much last year is because nobody could stop us.
Yep.
Nobody could stop the team. The 49ers in the NFC Championship game against the Packers had 186 yards before contact. When you run at that level of efficiency, there's no reason to pass the ball. So if Jimmy can grow and the team remains as dominant and the receivers come back healthy, there's no reason why things won't be open on the outside for everybody, and the team will pass more.
Yeah, that's what I always used to tell people when they would say, well, the 49ers only passed the ball, so amount of times in the playoffs. It's like, dude, look at the games.
Yeah.
Why would they fix something if it's not broken? The Packers couldn't stop Raheem Mostert to save their lives. And real quick, it's hilarious that they took a quarterback. Is he going to go in there and plug those holes on defense? No, they did nothing to help them out. But that's another thing. I agree. I think that the identity of this football team is going to depend on a number of key factors, but Jimmy Garoppolo taking a big step forward is probably the biggest storyline going into 2020.
Hmm.
And the health of the wide receivers group, is not far behind. This team is going to look completely different, depending on either the wide receiver Trent Taylor, Jalen Hurd come back healthy and productive, or they don't come back, or they come back and they're not the same people that the 49ers were
Right.
hoping for. It's going to look completely two different ways. So it remains to be seen. Obviously, we're hoping for the best. We hope that they come back and be productive, but only time will tell.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Niners News on 49ers Hive. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, so you stay alert for all 49ers Hive content. Follow us on Twitter at 49ers Hive, Instagram, same handle. Follow me on Twitter at Zach Hernan. Matt, any final words?
Hey, it's been a pleasure as always, Zach. Excited about the season coming up, and I think the team's going to do great things. You guys can follow me as always at Ataxis, ATAX1S on Twitter, and we'll see you next time.